Welcome back to Hawkbuster. My name is Helen and this is my brother Eric, and today we will be reviewing Star Trek Into Darkness. This movie came out in 2013 and continues where the 2009 reboot left off. Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise and his crew return home to Earth only to witness an act of terrorism that will send them on a mission back into open space to capture the man who did it.
In this episode, we will be discussing the pacing, cinematography, and plot of the movie. Towards the end, we will also discuss the obvious parallels between Into Darkness and Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, which came out in 1982.
So first let's talk about the pacing. I thought it was pretty well paced throughout, although there was that pretty large time skip towards the end when Jim was in a coma for 2 weeks, and after he died in the War Corps. So,
right. Yeah, that was 2 weeks is a pretty long time, and stuff's always happened to them up in space. So there was probably like a lot that went on then. I would like to see Spock commanding the ship since he was the first mate. I think that would have been pretty interesting. What would have happened to the rest of them around the ship? Yeah,
especially because Jim was their captain. Everyone was kind of really bummed when he died. So kind of really bummed. I mean, there was that part after when Spock was trying to kill Khan for killing Jim, indirectly killing Jim, but I think it would have definitely been less of like a jar, like when he just wakes up 2 weeks later and just kind of like goes on with his life, instead of like trying to explain like what happened in that time, because like I understand that not a lot happens when someone's in a coma, but like everyone else has lives too, like it's not just Jim.
Right. Next let's talk about cinematography. I thought the CGI special effects were pretty good, especially when doing all of the alien planets and life forms, things like that.
Yeah, because that's kind of like hard to do, because like most of the stuff that happens in Star Trek regarding like alien life was like completely made up from the original series, and I think that with all the advancements we've had in CGI and like digital imaging, that it was definitely a step up from the older movies and the TV show.
Yeah. And also something I noticed was the whole movie was set in cool lighting. Like the machines, the lights on the bridge, the red planet even, at the very beginning, it wasn't really like lit warmly. It was also kind of cool.
Yeah, like when Spock was trying to neutralize the volcano, like everything, like even the plants on that planet were like red, but the people were like really white with like black stripes and everything. So I think that the cool lighting definitely kind of offset the color scheme a little bit, but it was really nice and sort of like easy on the eyes for most of them.
Yeah, it still looked nice, yeah.
So next I'd like to talk about the plot. So we find out that John Harrison is actually Khan Noonien Singh, who blew up the Starfleet building and like killed all those admirals and everything. And I like to know why all of his people were disguised in torpedoes, of all things, because the Enterprise was sent on one mission to find a peaceful mission to find the terrorist that bombed the Starfleet building during the Admirals meeting, but they have 73 torpedoes on board. And I think that they really only needed like 2 or 3, especially if they're like nuclear torpedoes, which is like almost the equivalent of like a nuclear plant meltdown for one torpedo. So I think they only really need 2 or 3.
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, was kind of weird. You really gotta wonder what their intentions were. It was just kind of strange, really, that they'd need so many.
Yeah, and then at the end of the movie, there's the scene where you see that they put Khan back into his cryotube and refroze him. So like they didn't get rid of Khan and his men. They just they just kept them all in the torpedoes and like threw them in the basement, and we're all like, we'll deal with this later. So
poor choice.
It is a poor choice, especially he thinks he's probably gonna come back in like a later movie, because they didn't do anything to. I mean, like they stopped him, but he
could always come back.
He could always come back now because it's only a cryotube. Someone could unfreeze him. The cryotube could like die, and he could just like unfreeze on his own. So,
when he comes back, he'll be mad.
Probably even more mad than the first time. And Yeah, it's probably a setup for another movie, honestly. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the parallels between Star Trek Into Darkness and The Wrath of Khan from 1982, because there are obvious parallels. Like, first, Khan comes back in the newer movie, and he's disguised himself and taken on the alias John Harrison, and he becomes a terrorist. But in the older movie, they kind of like see his ship floating around in space, and they stop to like see what's wrong, and they accidentally unfreeze him.
Right.
Like, what are the chances you unfreeze the leader of the ship? But that's besides the point. And then also at the end of Into Darkness, when Jim throws himself into the warp core to hit it back into realignment, to realign it, and he ends up getting stuck in there and dies of radiation poisoning. In The Wrath of Khan, it was Spock who died in the warp core, and it kind of ended the movie after Spock died, and then you had to wait until the next movie to see whether he would come back or not.
But you knew he did. It was called A Search for Spock. So
Yeah. But in Star Trek Into Darkness, you know by the end of the movie that Jim is alive. He comes back, they find the cure in Khan's blood, and Dr. McCoy cures him and brings him back to life. He's in a coma for 2 weeks. So I don't think there was really enough time, like, in that whole sequence to really grieve for Jim. Like, you had the chance to grieve for Spock after The Wrath of Khan.
Right. Until the next movie came out.
Yeah.
Alright. Thank you for watching this episode of Hawkbuster. We hope you enjoyed it.
For more movie reviews, subscribe to our YouTube channel, WRHS-TV.